Okay, so we're going to carry on with our performance videos looking at CSS performance, and specifically now the Google metrics for what makes a page performant and things we can do to kind of merit those. Google kind of gets a bad reputation often, rightly so, but the metrics they have for page performance are a genuine attempt to make the web better. If you think about the things you hate about websites, and there's an exhaustive list these days, but it's just that kind of horrible experience of you load up a page and then ads appear and the content jumps, and then you go to scroll but then it's still loading, so it's kind of locked, and then you go to click on something but then it jumps and moves, and then an ad pops into place, and you're just constantly having a negative experience while you're using the web. The idea that a company like Google can now penalize your site for not following their metrics is kind of useful, because it means all people are going to gear towards this. And the fact they're now going to start penalizing sites which don't just make better websites is probably a good example. It's time to interactive, TTI, which is basically saying, just get moving. Let me use your website. Get out of the way. You might load something up, but it's all fixed and disabled and scrolly because it's got 10 megabytes of JavaScript rolling on the background. Can I just use your website? How soon before I can actually use it? This first contentful paint has always been around. That's just, when can I see something? But then this first meaningful paint, saying like, yeah, okay, you got your logo, but when am I going to get the form? When am I going to get the big image? When am I going to get something that actually looks like the page is more or less there? Then there's cumulative layout shift, which is just saying, just stop jumping around. I'm so sick of that you load the page, but then the ads jump in, then the thing scrolls by, and then the text re-renders. It's what we covered in the previous video about kind of render cycles, like how annoying is your web page? How much is it going to cause problems while I'm trying to load it? How much repainting and re-layout work are you doing? This is particularly when you do your lighthouse checks in your dev tools. If you do any kind of analysis, they quite often will check on mobile, because you've got to consider mobile is often, for most consumer-facing sites, a massive percentage of the user base, but also it's going to have the less reliable connections, meaning your resources are going to be strained, and that kind of loading process, the CPU is slow. It's going to possibly have your worst score for performance on the key thing. If you look into any performance review, they're going to start by just saying send less. I mean, the easiest way to load less on a page is just to send less. So deprioritize all the unimportant scripts, split up things so you can just load the essential things. But like, just doing less is better, right? But there's also lots of things we can do to just make the experience better. What we're talking here about is not just the kind of the score, the metric about the performance, but also just the user experience. How much nicer can you make it when a web page loads up and starts up? And can you in some way skirt around that kind of slow load up time so that the user doesn't kind of just have a bad time? So firstly, to deal with that meaningful paint, it might be that what you want is a big banner image, and that's going to have a resolution problem that you need to, it's on mobile, it's going to be a slower load up, it's going to be a problem. So maybe you can do an initial step. It could be that you just create, at low level, you could just make a big empty square, like a big grey box. Or it could be that you can make a fallback. So if your image is a lovely high-res photo, maybe there's like an SVG blocky version that could load in initially. You could even inline it on the page, so it doesn't have to go off and load an external resource. Something that on mobile might be able to load up instantly. And then even if it takes 3 seconds for the image to come in, the first meaningful paint will be there. The Google analysis will say, okay, well, this looks like the first stages of a loaded website. And that way you'll kind of score higher for just having got something on the page. You'll have the issue with fonts, like, because if you're using a custom font, you're going to have this situation where the font loads, and then a few seconds later the custom font comes in, and that means it basically has to repaint all of your text again in the kind of new stylized font. That's just frustrating, and there might not be a way around that other than not using a fancy font or multiple fonts that makes it an issue. When you use Google Fonts, nowadays by default they give you the pre-connect link, which should mean that before it even goes off to kind of load your fonts, it kind of establishes a connection which will make the loading of the fonts faster. But it's also just worth thinking about the sizes. So if you look at that jump and just see like, is the size of your default text similar enough to your actual custom font, so when the switch happens, it doesn't just go from this size to this size and all your text suddenly jumps. Imagine your web page has got like text on it and someone starts reading an article and suddenly then the paragraph jumps and you have to then scroll back down again. Everything's sort of re-rendering on the page. That's a pain. If you can at least match those sizes, it means the user experience will just be kind of fairly seamless when the font comes in. Considering mobile also, we can target that user experience. There is a new media query for prefers reduced data. This is works like the media queries people use for width to do responsive websites. You can just specifically put some content inside this tag. So what you're saying is if someone is specifically trying to load less data, so it might be someone's put a setting on their browser, or they might be in a kind of low battery setting where they say, I don't want to be doing the excess load. It means you could kind of move all your animations, your big images, all your custom stuff into this separate environment. You're starting to not make just like a mobile site and a desktop site, but you're just starting to make a kind of low-level basic render site and then kind of the standard for a higher speed. You can also actually use JavaScript to get the connection type, so you can work out if they're on 2G, 3G, fast 3G, whatever. You can pare down, so you might be able to just target 2G in particular and say like, we're going to give a fallback that's kind of not going to load a custom font, that's not going to load big images, and it's just going to give you a very quick loaded experience because you're going to struggle to get the resources as well. The thing to think about is if your site has ads or any dynamic content, you kind of just want to avoid that jankiness. I mean, unless it's part of your sneaky algorithm and, you know, go to hell, but like if you really don't want that thing where the user scrolls and then something jumps and pushes the content, and then as they scroll, or every time they go to hit a button, then you push a new ad in place, something horrible like that. Basically just add dimensions, add frames. So if you've got an ad box on the side, at the top, whatever, just add a set height, width, whatever. You'll save that problem because of the content will, you know, just flash in and jump into that box. It can load, leave, whatever, but at no point is it going to have to resize your page. It's going to know exactly where those dimensions and those sections of your page are. That's as simple as just adding a height, width, like attribute to something, and you'll solve a massive layout shift issue, but also make a better website in general. If your website kind of homepage, loading, landing page essentially has something like a form, something which actually requires input. There's a lot of, you know, shopping sites or you know, price comparison, a lot of things where the first landing is just click here and type in your thing and we can get started. You really want that user to land and be able to instantly do that. You'd hate the idea that it lands, but because it's part of a React app, it's going to have to load in the background, and that means that until it's got the API data, it's kind of got to wait for a few seconds so it can give you the autocomplete, all that stuff. You want someone to just be able to start searching. So this is just about how you set that up, but it might make more sense that you either make that one central important thing not part of your big React app, so someone can just start typing, you know, use some jQuery, or just use some regular JavaScript so that it isn't going to be blocking, or you just configure it in such a way within your components that this is going to, by default, show straight away. It's not going to have to wait to be booted and rendered and implanted in the page, but it's also going to mean you can click into it and start typing whilst it's doing all the setup and loading, and then perhaps once it's then ready, it can work out what's already in the search box and start working with it that way. Whatever just impinges on the user's ability to start working is going to penalize both your performance score, but also just going to make your site worse. The things we keep hitting on here are a lot like the videos we did recently on accessibility, which are just sort of saying like, it doesn't have to be a bunch of rules, it doesn't have to be this arduous thing, it's just make good websites, just make things that are nice to use, try and think about the actual end user. If you make something that's kind of going to be a pain to deal with, then it sucks both for the users, but also means you've made a bad site in terms of its score. If you make a site that's accessible and performant, not only do you get the lighthouse ticks, but you've just also made something that people would want to use, so everybody wins. That's all really just with the metrics. Obviously you can go in a lot more depth about those particular metrics, but those are some particular things to work out, some quick wins you can get to score well on the Google metrics for performance. Let me know any thoughts in the comments, and that's all, you know, have a nice day.